Now 250,000. Now, but to get 275. High, but to get 275. 3. Now 300,000. Now 3 1/4, 325. High, but to get 3 1/4, but to get 325. Now half. Now, but to get 300.
And good morning from Dallas, Texas. It's December the 7th, 2020, and what a year it has been. I can't even believe all the things that have happened this year, and things keep happening. Of course, this is a historic day, December the 7th, as we reflect back on the history of the United States, and we'll touch on that a little bit. But I want to get right into our guest today, Richard Marquez, who you've seen on this podcast before, as a representative for Texans Can, and Texans Can Cars for Kids actually is my connection, because until COVID hit, of course we were doing the car auction to raise money for education, and the gentleman behind that cause is Richard. And good morning, Richard.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. It's a beautiful day today here in Dallas, and Richard has jumped into an adventure that he's already been involved in. A lot of people don't know about all of his educational background. And just as a reacquaintance for the folks who didn't see the other show, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, my educational background is I started teaching in 1975. That's can't even remember how long.
Was that in DISD?
Yes, in the Dallas School District at Thomas Edison Middle School. Uh-huh. I was 28 years old. I just graduated from college. I'd gone to school on the GI Bill, and I loved it. Mm-hmm. I loved every minute of it. I worked my way through the education business. I basically did everything you can imagine in education, from the teacher all the way to the superintendent's position.
Right.
I spent a year and a half in Washington, D.C. as the advisor to the Secretary of Education on dropout prevention.
Mm-hmm. They need you back.
The problem's still here. I didn't do much, but yeah, and then I left and started my own consulting company. And throughout the years, I worked in schools across the country, helping them get better and improving them. And through the processes, I would teach in classrooms every day. And I had this experience with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Lee Hanel, who would talk about this whole issue of cognitive development and thinking, the whole issue of thinking. And so I became very interested in that entire aspect. So as I did some of Lee's work, I realized in the classrooms the impact of reading eventually, because everything came back to the issue of reading. No matter what you did, no matter what subject you were teaching, it was always centered around having to read the material. Because if you couldn't read the material, you couldn't do the work. And so I would literally actually teach as many as 6, sometimes 7 classes, actually learning my own systems and demonstrating them for teachers. I would teach a teacher's class, and from kinder, all the way through 12th grade.
Sure.
So kinder, I think, is the toughest grade to teach. It requires so much energy day in and day out.
Yep.
And I was worn out. I spent 2 days teaching in kinders, and let me tell you something. I must have slept for 2 days. 'Cause if you ask me, the hardest working teachers out there are the early childhood teachers.
Well, I believe that. I've got my 6-year-old grandson. I'm telling you, just trying to keep up with him and watch my daughter deal with him in education. And, of course, he's had at-home teaching, in-home school, as well as classroom. He's back in the classroom now. Praise God. And so, but it's hard. It's hard, and the children today. Well, let's be honest about it. So many of them are medicated, and parents aren't parenting. They've been forced. Actually, the pandemic, COVID-19, has forced a lot of parents to reevaluate their parenting?
Well, parenting is a cycle, Mike, and you have to look at it. You have to step back and say, how does one learn to be a parent? Well, you learn it from your parents. So if your parents were not appropriate role models, not that they don't want to, my understanding, my philosophy is that parents love their children, and in many instances they're not prepared or know what to really do for them. It's kind of like they say, read to your child, read to your child. That sounds easy, but when you look at the statistics, and the majority of, over 30% of people are poor readers, if anything, well, all of a sudden you've got 30% of children who aren't going to be read to, no matter what, because the parent can't. And that becomes a cycle because that child won't be a reader. And so all of a sudden you hit them, they get in school, they wind up being your failure, so you wind up with 30% of the population consistently underperforming and consistently not being able to participate in the economy.
Do we know, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I don't know, where the United States ranks today in reading level, reading ability?
Well, across all the developing countries, the statistics aren't really there in terms of where we are. I think the term would be literacy, but everything's so clouded. Statistically, things are so clouded. If you look at statistics and you look at some of the, I think the website was Micro Trends. It says since 2005, the U.S. has a 99% literacy rate. In other words, 99% of Americans can read.
We know that's not true.
And I know that, but that's a consistent problem because nobody isolates on the darn thing.
Now, that's fake news.
Yes, yes. And then you look at other statistics that say in the state of Texas, coming out of UTA, in the state of Texas, only 81% of the people in Texas are literate. And even that, you begin to question, what do they mean by literacy? What exactly are you measuring?
Yeah.
But you're giving away 19% of the population already.
Wow. So, and of course, you and I had breakfast a couple of weeks ago, and we talked a lot about this, and we're going to get to your reading program. But I want, I was watching the news. It was just really funny because I watch the news every morning, or what they call news. It's kind of like entertainment news now.
Yeah.
We don't have news. It's like entertainment news and comment.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was watching CBS this morning, and at 8:30 they came on with a segment on children and doing at-home learning, and just consistent with what you had told me 2 weeks ago, that 42 to 46%, and it's probably higher than this, 42 to 46% of the Houston Independent School District students were getting Fs. They interviewed a mother down, I think, in either Houston or Florida, and she said that her daughter had never gotten a failing grade before, and she got a D, and she was devastated. And it was and then they interviewed a child expert, so right along your lines, where it wasn't just about reading. They were talking about the cognitive part of this, the damage that is being done mentally to these children who are underperforming. And he did use the word suicide rate. And I thought, well, that's pretty, because you and I talked about that. I said they're covering all this information about, education and what's happening to our population and the COVID-19, but no one, I haven't seen once, maybe somebody can correct me if they want to, I've heard no major news outlet talk about the suicide rate in the United States, because I know a lot of people that are suffering through depression. I've even done it myself. I've gone through that. And you and I talked about that, is that we're going through a period of time where we don't know what's going to happen next, which is, that's the fear factor. And the fear factor is what a lot of political groups and a lot of countries use in the messaging. So if you're in fear of losing your home, and I'm going to talk about that later because it's a real deal. You can't live in fear. Let's talk about how Marquez Reading came about, because I know being a lifelong educator and in the DISD, and I know DISD very well.
22, almost 23 years.
Yep. Well, see, it's funny because it has no correlation, but I probably sold a lot of the equipment that you had at DISD because I had the contract for over 20 years, which is saying something in a system. If you have a contract for 20 years,
Yeah, you're good.
You're doing pretty good. And of course, and we saw some superintendents come and go. And, it was an interesting time in the 80s and 90s. I'll just say that. So how did you...
Let me tell you.
Yeah.
When I was in Washington, D.C., my task was to look at the dropout issue across the country. And so I was looking at reading, research in the reading. And I've discovered this term in the research, metacognition. I didn't know what it was. I looked it up in the dictionary. Basically, it said thinking about thinking. But because it was in the reading research, I figured there was something to it. And I said, well, maybe there's an answer here for some situation. When I left Washington, I came back to Dallas as an area sub. And I was still very interested. I would look up articles on it. I'd find very little, if anything, written. And then my principals brought back a card from the A&M Principal Center, a gentleman, Dr. Lee Hanel, out of Phoenix, Arizona. And so I called Lee because I was very interested in metacognition. And he came, I flew him to Dallas. We went to schools. The amazing thing was he was able to go in the classroom and model with kids, which I thought was fantastic. But the whole issue was about thinking. And there was another process to reading above comprehension, which was the thinking, the metacognitive development skills, actually the higher order thinking skills. And so I started, when I left the superintendency, I started working with Lee. And come to find out, Lee had been educated in Israel. Or at least he gotten his doctorate in Israel, working with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Reuben Fierstein at the Fierstein Institute. And so I became very interested in all of the works, and I started doing some of Lee's trainings, and people would hire me to come back to the districts and work with their principals and work with their teachers. So that's when I started working in the classrooms and teaching classes. And so even to this day, I can go into any teacher's classroom and I can model the lesson and actually show them how to get the kids engaged in the reading and the thinking, regardless of the subject matter. So that's how it all came about. The reason I came to the CAN was I needed a platform in which to prove it. And it's proven now. It's proven itself. When I got there, the test scores on the exit exam were something like 8%, 10%, 15% of the kids passing. By 2011, the passing rates were at 70 in algebra, mind you, in math. They went from single digits in math to the 70s. So the real issue is reading. And so, and here lately we did a little, quick little study of the individual model, working with special ed and second language learners, and the results were amazing. So if you really look at the aspect of what reading does, is it's your entry into the world. Without it, you can't get in the door. I mean, every barrier there is into your life has reading stuck in the middle of it.
Yep.
And we take it for granted. We assume that children will learn to read, and then we accept when children can't learn to read. And so we know by the third grade, children can't read. And so in Texas, Do you know we plan our prison populations based on the number of kids who can't read in third grade?
No, I did not know that.
That's how they project the prison budget. They already know the answer. So if you know an answer, Mike, why don't you just change things and do something about it? And I think today is very graphic. Teachers are being asked to do the exact same thing today that they would be doing in their classroom, regardless of the fact that they have two things going on in there and all this stress. It's had whole adherence to what we've always done. The school day has to be X number of minutes. Regardless of whether the child learns or not, we don't care.
They're putting in their time.
As long as they're putting in their time, they're doing. And the teacher has to put in X number of minutes. This whole thing, I think, has opened up the underbelly of the real weakness in our education system because it's the bureaucratic mess.
Yep.
It's not the people in the classrooms and the people working in the schools. These are dedicated, hardworking people who really care. But it's kind of like an oppression of rules and regulations, and they don't let up. This week they're testing, Mike. Can you imagine across the state of Texas? Kids who have failed the test before and other kids have to take a test today and the rest of the week.
They're totally failing the education that they're taking,
But
and they're expecting to take a test.
That's right. And you know what they heard? They said, well, you were going to have to see 2 years gain this time around because we've lost so much ground. Yeah. Now, how do you expect to see 2 years gain when you haven't even caught up and you're not even back in the classroom?
They were addressing that this morning in the segment that I watched. This was interesting to me. So in the Carolinas, I can't remember if it was North or South, I don't know. I think it was North Carolina. They were interviewing a gentleman in one of the school districts, and he said, well, we have made the decision. We are not going to use the A, B, C, D, F. We're going to do A, B, C, incomplete. Because, and he, kind of on the lines of what you said, but not exactly. But he said, we are going to have to, because this is being forced on us, we're going to have to really look at our grading systems, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. He said, we don't want to just flunk everybody and have the kids down in the dumps where they just quit.
Yes.
They just don't.
Exactly.
If you give an A, B student or a C student and you just start giving them Fs, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure at a given point, push comes to shove, they're going to say, you know what, I can't do it.
Yes.
And they're going to fall through the cracks.
Yes.
You made an interesting comment to me at breakfast that, well, I'm going to let you say it. How many kids in our current school systems in Texas, or across the United States for that matter, are engaged in the educational process right now with the in-home?
The latest statistics say 20% of the kids never logged on.
Never logged on.
No. In Dallas alone, the internet access for the majority of the people in the city is somewhere around only 60-something% people have access. So even if you want to, you can't.
Even if they handed you the computer, you have no way to turn it on.
And it's sporadic at least. Even if you give you a hotspot, you have to go get near something that has a Wi-Fi in order to use the hotspot. So unless every kid is sitting at Starbucks, which doesn't happen to be in their neighborhoods,
right?
Or if you and so on. So 20% of them aren't even logged on.
I venture to say much more than that.
Yes, but that's conservative.
You were being kind.
Yes, it's conservative, and then the numbers range anywhere from 20 to 30 to 40 to 50 to 70% in some areas of kids failing.
Yeah.
Even if they and teachers will report to you that they have kids who log on, who they can see, who are there in front of them and aren't doing anything. Yeah. Because it's not the kind of interaction they're used to. We're humans.
Yep.
And Fierstein, I think, made an excellent point. He says, only a human can teach another human to think. So teaching is a human business. And so when you put it on a screen, you just remove the humanity of that whole aspect.
I think you're an educator, and I am too. I'm a state-approved educator through the Texas Workforce Commission. And I actually got my original certification through the Texas Education Agency back in 1992. But I was thinking back of when I was a second grader, first grade, second grade, third grade. Do you remember all your teachers?
I remember a few. I don't remember them all.
Let me tell you, I remember every single teacher I've
Wow.
ever had. And I don't know why. I mean, I don't know, except to say this. They had an impact.
That's it.
They made an impact. I remember, and this is not tooting my horn. I lived on a farm behind the elementary school where we lived in a rural community north of here, about an hour. And I mean, literally, if you left the school and you could walk 200 yards,
To your
you're actually crossed the fence onto the farm. And I remember that year vividly. First grade, vividly. Kindergarten, vividly. And I became friends with all of my teachers. That's another thing.
That's why.
I liked being with the teachers, and I enjoyed it. I wasn't afraid of teachers. I embraced it. I remember standing in Southern California. We had just moved out there, and I was a pretty shy kid in fourth, fifth grade. And I just remember standing at the window. I actually was standing at the window of a school. It was called Era Vista Elementary School in Brea, California. And I remember standing, looking out the window, and there was a globe. For those that, I don't know if all the kids even have seen a globe. I don't even know if they have globes in the classroom anymore, but I just remember turning that globe. And I was talking to my fourth grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Withy. And Mrs. Withy was a real fragile little woman. And I just remember I said something to her, and she said, "You know what? You could be the president of the United States if you wanted to." She said, "You can do anything you want." And that's the kind of teachers you embrace.
That's the humanity. That's
the touch.
That's that human touch that can't be given by a machine. It can't be transported from a screen. They can't do the kind of thing that humans need. See, humans learn from other humans. That's the issue. I just related that issue to the parenting. You can only learn what the other human has. Yeah. So if you're caught in that environment, you're going to be that environment. And the only way to take you out is to transport you out of that environment. And you know the vehicle that will transport you out of any environment? Reading. Mm-hmm. You don't have to travel to Paris, Mike. You can pick up a book and read and read your way to Paris. Yep. And imagine your way through all those places. And then hopefully someday you can visit and it'll all come back to you because you did it through a book. See, that opens the window to the world, the ability to read. Yet 30% of the people in this country walk around illiterate. So, and how do they participate in the economy, Mike? How do 30% of people participate in the economy? The guy said at the Federal Reserve, he said there are enough jobs in America for every American. They're not skilled enough to take them. Yep. So what do? They go looking for people from external to fill those jobs because the people here can't. So all we have to do, which is the most amazing thing to me, is
teach people to read.
Teach people to read. And it's not a failed thing. It's not something that you can't do. Up until this point, we've accepted the idea that if a child by third grade can't learn to read, they never will. And the schools are trying to do the best they can, and they know how.
But look how much red tape. Look.
It's all about no more about common sense. It's do this, do this, do this, do this. And in some instances, here's a real issue with education is nobody teaches you how to teach, Mike.
Right.
Nobody teaches you how to teach. If you're lucky to get a good teacher who is your supervisor, a good one, you may be okay. But if you don't, then you're in trouble. And the only way you learn how to teach is trial and error. And if you don't learn through trial and error, guess what? You're going to be a mediocre, if not a bad teacher at best. Yeah. So even the systems we have for preparing teachers for the classroom are not the greatest thing in the world.
Inadequate, totally inadequate.
And then we blame them.
Yes.
Then it's their fault because
Well-
they didn't learn it the way we told them to learn it.
I have to give a shout out real quick to a friend of mine up in Gainesville. She's a school teacher. She's been a friend of mine for forever, 55 years.
Oh, wow.
Goes back to second, third grade, and she has tested positive for COVID, so she's home and she's been teaching, and so I've been watching Dana for the last. And her name is Dana Frederick, and she's probably watching because she's stuck at home. But I've watched her frustration the entire school year. She's been a teacher for probably, 30 years or more. She's taught all different grades. I think she's doing third grade now, but she's done all of them along the way. And but I've watched her frustration during this COVID period because it was, we're going to have in-class teaching. And then they would halt it, and then she wouldn't know which class she was teaching the next day, and then it'd be half the kids were in the class and half the kids were not in the class. I mean, truly, in my opinion, a disaster of an educational process, and I don't necessarily blame the superintendent of the schools.
You can't.
Because a lot of this is politics. A lot of it's been politics.
It's money. Here's what the superintendents have been told. If you don't do this, if you don't bring these people back, and if you don't, we're not going to pay you.
Yeah.
See, and you start talking about not paying me. I mean, school districts run on. I mean, how am I supposed to make my payroll if you're not going to pay me? Then I'm forced to do what you want me to do.
Yeah.
And so, as much as I don't want to do this to the teachers, I have no choice. It's either we do this or nobody gets paid. And so it's a catch-22.
You remember, of course, I started doing the DISD surplus auctions on Keast down at the old warehouse next to the Dart Yard. And that was in 1983, okay? And it was a different world back then. Of course, at that time, they were storing their surplus at a closed school over on the west side.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that.
Benito Juarez.
Yeah, and then we ended up going to Keast. But I remember we were selling something, and it looked new. It looked fairly new. And I said, why are we selling that? And they go, well, because we need to buy more.
Because they gave us money, we had to spend it.
They gave us the money, and they were going to spend it, and they were going to keep asking for more, and that was the game. And I used to get frustrated, although I didn't go to DISD. I went to high school in Houston, but I went to elementary schools north of here and junior high in Houston. So I never went to the DISD, but I used to go to a lot of the schools, and I would go to schools and you and I talked about this. I used to read to classes. There was a push a long time ago for people to come in that wanted to volunteer, that were either in business or whatever, and go in and read to the students. And to me, that was huge. I loved reading to the students. I thought it was great fun. But see, now, as a person that raises so much money for charity, and raising money through selling cars for Texans Can for the last 8 years or 9 years. When you look at all the charities that we work with and all the 501c3s, what you're basically telling me is we need a greater advancement in investing in reading, raising money, and getting people involved in reading. I did hear a statement last week on another news show where they were talking about what's going on in the world right now. When you look at people like Bill Gates, and you got Warren Buffett, and then you've got, of course, Bezos, it's time for the billionaires to step up. You don't just make money. You need to put your money into something that makes a difference.
And I'll give you a classic example. One of the largest workforces now is Amazon.
Sure.
All right. If Bezos invested in his employees and had reading improvement classes for his employees. No more than 30 minutes
Yep.
twice a week. His productivity, his job performance, his employees' job satisfaction would skyrocket.
Well, he's running commercials. I say he, the company. Amazon's running commercials now about how they're educating students in school. I can't remember what the number was, like 500,000 worldwide on science. But I'm assuming they're not doing the same thing for their employees.
Here's the interesting thing, Mike. You know what it takes to really learn science? Your ability to read.
Well, I believe that because
See,
I was terrible at science.
You ever seen a science? You ever seen a science book? You ever really paid attention? Science books are always written at grade level or above grade level. Did you know that?
No.
You can't lower the language requirement in science. You can't. Have you seen all that vocabulary in science?
I ran from it.
Osmosis can't be given to a kinder, and you change the word to mean osmosis because it's the same no matter where you are, and so those science books are critical to your learning.
Yeah.
So if you can't read them or you're poor at it, your science scores, no matter how smart you are in terms of science, are definitely going to be minimized. Because you can't prove to me how much science you know because you got to take a test to prove it.
Yeah.
And that test is really not a science test, it's a reading test. And that's what people fail to understand is that no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're trying to accomplish, you're going to have to at some point pick up the instructions,
Yeah. Yeah.
the manual,
Yeah.
the directions. Somewhere in there, when you take the test, you're going to have to read the darn thing to answer the questions.
See, you've uncovered a 50-year problem for me. You've hit it right on the nail. I was the worst student when it came to things like algebra and things like science. I wasn't good. I thought it was fascinating. I had it. You remember they used to have those chemistry sets in the metal, the little metal case, and you could open it up and you could mix this and that. And yeah, I did all that, but I had a real hard time. Now, if it's the written word, speaking, delivering, anything the other direction, I was real strong in that area. Why is that just a what? And you probably know this, but I mean, some people just are naturally strong in the liberal arts, whether it's singing, memory work like that.
Well, interest makes a big difference for people. There is a definite interest, but
So if you like it.
But here's the other thing, though. Teachers make a huge difference. There are kids who don't say, "I don't like science," and then they wind up in a science teacher's class. And all of a sudden they go, I'm enjoying science. Mm-hmm. Why is this kid enjoying science? The teacher, yes. I had an algebra teacher once at Sunset High School. And he came to me, he said, "Mr. Marquez, every Wednesday I'm going to make my kids read." And he said, "So I brought you some books." He said, if a kid comes to my class on Wednesday and doesn't bring a book, I want you to give him one and send him back to my class. I said, "Sure." So he took 20% of his teaching periods and had the kids reading. He had the best scores. But do you know the rest of the math department was upset because he was doing something different than they were. But his results definitely pointed to the right direction. Now, did he teach reading? No. Did he make the kids read and then discuss? Yes. See, Mike, the discussion of what you're reading actually is what drives the thinking. But first you have to pick up the information. So you can't talk about something unless you first understand all the information, which is the reason you read. You read to gather data, to gather the information. Then, in order for you to make sense of it, you and I have to discuss it. And if I'm the teacher, I know what questions to ask you in order to clarify for you what you're thinking in your head. So once you and I have that discussion, you'll walk away with a solid understanding of not only your text, but of what it's trying to say to you.
In the 8th grade, I had a teacher named Laughlin, and he was a history teacher. And the thing that I liked about his class is he would pass out newspapers, and it was a history class. So every class, we would have to read articles about current history, what was going on. And, I had a flashback. I have a lot of those. But I had a flashback about that class because I remember that was one of the things that he used to do, is stand in front of the class with a newspaper in his hand, and he would talk about current events and what's going on in the world, which made all of us far more alert as to what was going on. Of course, I was a newsie forever. I'm one of the crazy kids that would watch the news in the morning and watch the news at night, and lived around Walter Cronkite and all that. But in reflection, it was the reading and watching. The other thing that I gathered from the news, what I gained from it, was watching somebody read. I found that fascinating. I think that's why I find this easy.
Well, if they're reading out loud, it's the dynamic. If they're reading out loud and you're following along, you're hearing those words pronounced for you. It's actually making a difference, because as you visually look at that word, you're hearing the sound. At the same time, you're looking at the word and hearing the sound. That's translating into your neural networks. There's a lady in Tufts University, Dr. Marianne Wolf. She says, through her research on brain scans and so on, she said the human brain is not wired for reading. So it's not an automatic. So how do we learn to read? Well, we have to build the neural network for it. And that's where the breakdown comes, because if the neural networks are not built, that's when a child becomes illiterate, and that's when they cannot read. So the task is to rebuild that neural network, to go back and put it in. Now, you want to hear something ironic? The human brain is so powerful that it can assimilate words regardless of the grade level. Yes. If it interacts with those words consistently over a period of time, they go into the neural network, they go into the schema, and they're held there. And the next time the individual sees the word, the sound comes up at the same time that the word comes up.
Interesting.
That's how you develop fluency. But if that sound and that word don't hit together, there are kids sitting in classrooms right now who have a kid next to them named John. They talk to John, they call him John, they do all of that, and then when the word John shows up on text, they don't know it. That's right. They'll look at the word and can't pronounce it. But that kid is sitting right next to them. They never correlated the visual picture of that word with that sound. So children and humans are walking around with a huge vocabulary in their head from their conversations and everything else, but their visual vocabulary is not connected. That's the reading issue. Mm-hmm. That's the reading disconnect, because the neural networks have not been built. And the research says, very simply, there's only one way to connect those and build fluency, and that's to read out loud. Right. But you know what a kid said to me in California once in a classroom? We were reading, and they read. I don't read to them, they read to me. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, and I asked the student, I said, tell me, could you guys learn to do this on your own? And the student said, no, Mr. Marquez, we couldn't do this on our own. And I said, tell me why, explain to me why you couldn't. He said, we wouldn't know how to pronounce these words. So somebody who knows how to read has to pronounce it for you. Now, it's a systematic approach that when the child runs into a word they don't know, you merely pronounce it for them. And in a period of time, a very short period of time, that child will be able to pronounce that word. But not only will they be able to pronounce it, they'll hold it. And that word now becomes part of their actual vocabulary development.
Let's a couple things. I find myself sometimes putting on closed caption. I kind of like it. It's almost like I'm reading the news, even though there's somebody talking to me, but I'll read along with them.
Yeah, I noticed when they misspell the words.
Oh, it
or
drives
when
me
they-
cause that's what I was going to mention to you. I was going to say, we can put a man on the moon. We can do all of these things, but we can't get closed caption correct, and it just kills me that we have not come up with the computerization or the technology that gets it right.
Well,
even a spell check. You would think there'd be an automated spell check. It just drives me crazy. Now, the other question I've got, we have an epidemic in the United States, which is in every family, cross section of America, every demographic, some greater than others, and that is with drugs and alcohol, and birth defects and things of this nature. Do we know what the percentage of the children born today that have defects that affect their cognitive and also the ability to read or do anything with their brain?
The statistics on those are not as huge as you might think. The majority of kids are pretty normal. You have a percentage of students who are dyslexic,
Yes.
but in Israel, they overcome that
How?
through cognitive development, through their what
Programs.
they call their their instrumental enrichment program. They actually overcome dyslexia. They've had huge results with Down syndrome kids and with autism. And we've dealt with some of it at the clinic. We had a clinic. We had until COVID. A clinic where we actually had children with Asperger's and children who are really full-blown autistic.
Yep.
And over a period of a year to year and a half, the kids with Asperger's, you couldn't tell they had ever had it. And then the others became functioning individuals.
I don't know if you're aware, but I up until this year, I have, for many years, probably, I don't know, going on 10 years, have conducted a fundraising auction for Notre Dame School. And for those from Dallas that know Notre Dame School, I toured the school before I ever agreed to do the auction. Just I like to know what I'm getting myself into, and I want to buy in. I want to buy in, and so. And for those that don't know, Notre Dame School has been here in Dallas for many, many years. There's a whole story about it. I won't bore you with it. But all of the children there are special needs. Most of them, not all, but most have Downs.
Yes.
That's the primary student of that school. And I think when you mentioned that, I was thinking, I don't know what they do. I don't know what type of reading programs they have.
That's the amazing thing. The amazing thing is the First Thing Institute has been sitting there for over 50 years in Israel. And it's known throughout the world. But in the United States, you won't find it. You'll find pockets of it somewhere where some individuals have found it and brought it and so on and so forth. Because it says things that to some people seem impossible. In other words, it says you can overcome the majority of these issues with time and the appropriate processes. And we're not used to hearing that. Plus, the other thing is it's not medicine-induced.
Yep.
So there are no pharmaceuticals. So all of a sudden,
So there's no major pharmaceutical companies wanting to. They're not benefiting, so there's no investment
it's
there.
like ADD. They solved the ADD issue. Do you know that in over a period of 4 to 5 years, they can eliminate ADD just working with a kid 1 hour a week or something, and so all of a sudden you're not taking Ritalin, you're not taking any of the other things because you're ADD. All of a sudden you can control your systems. And if you catch it in early childhood, you can almost eliminate it starting out using the systems coming out of Israel. But there's a thing on innovation that I heard a gentleman by the name of Kim Koo, I think his name was. We wound up in a session. Here's what he said. He said there's an interesting phenomenon in America. It's called NIH. And it's been studied either, I don't know whether it was MIT or Harvard who did the research on it. But basically, he says it's the biggest detriment to innovation in America. And I kept thinking, kept waiting, and he said it's called not invented here. We're so parochial that if it's not invented by me and it's not invented here, then it can't be.
Can't be any good.
No. Yep. So if it violates my particular belief system, then it cannot work.
Can't work.
And so instead of saying, what do we have to lose? You know, if 30% of the population is illiterate, what do we have to lose? Right. I mean, you're not going to hurt them. Can you hurt somebody who can't read? What are you going? You're going to devastate them or something? They're already devastated. They know their condition. They know their circumstances. And think about this, Mike. You're 55 years old and your company shuts down.
Yep.
You can't find another job. You know why? Because you don't have the reading ability to find that job, because that job you just lost happened to be all manual.
Yep.
The new one requires the ability to read manuals, to take classes, to do all those things. And even though you want to work and you have the will to work, you can't get the job.
Yep.
And so now
you have the skill.
And so now you're out of work. Now you're on the public dole and you hate it. You hate it because you weren't raised that way. You were raised to work and you'd worked all your life. Now you hate it. Now you're depressed. Yep. What comes next, Mike? The drugs?
Yep.
The alcohol?
Yep.
Because you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel.
That's right.
And all you would have to do is take that individual into a retraining program and work on first, more than anything else, their ability to read.
So your program is Marquez Reading. So tell them what your plans are. Tell them what you want to do.
Well, here's the thing. It's really called Cognitive Development Through Reading Across the Curriculum.
Well, all the people that need it can't read that.
I know. So as I was developing it, I would show up on the school campuses, and the kids would say to me, they'd catch me coming into the school, and they'd go, Mr. Marquez, are you teaching my class today? Can you come teach my class today? I'd say, well, I don't know what the schedule is, but if I wind up, he said, yeah, come do Marquez in my class. They called it Marquez. So everywhere I went, the kids called it Marquez because they'd associate it with me. So eventually it got to be known as Marquez Reading. So that's the reason it came about. But in order to make it plausible for the establishment, I had to give it a title that was more in line with what it does. And it really is developing the thinking processes while building your reading capacity. And so it teaches the non-reader how to read, teaches the poor reader how to comprehend, and it teaches the good reader how to think their way through their reading. So it affects all of them, and it affects them in different ways. So it has a classroom model, which interestingly enough, I built it so that it's very transportable. It's very simple to put into schools. It's not a burden to any school. There's no curriculum required. You can use the one you have. You don't have to buy a new one. The materials are your materials, so there are no materials to buy. Basically, it's the training and the coaching that really is your cause, your training and your coaching. And then you can put it or you can nest it in an area in your school where the kids get impact and it doesn't interfere with your operations of anything else that you do on a daily basis. the results we had with the special ed students and the ELL, the English language learners, those results were gained by no more than 10 minutes of individual work with students a day. 10 minutes out of the entire day, Mike. The kid would come, the teacher would sit, do the intervention with the student, and in a matter of less than 3 months, those kids' scores on that end of course exam shot through the roof. Why? Because we addressed the single most difficult issue for that child. They're in special ed. One of the things they can't do is read.
Yep.
Their ELLs are coming to this country from all over the world, by the way. It's not just Spanish.
Sure.
They can't assimilate unless they learn to read.
Yep.
And so that's the real essence of why reading is so critical. But the dynamic of it doesn't take that much time, I think, was a scary thing to me. When I realized the movement of a human being who already has background and schema is not as difficult as you might think in order to engage them in this process. The other thing I've learned is that once they achieve a level of success, they feel it, they taste it,
Yep.
they want it.
Yep.
Say, if I've never been successful at school, and all of a sudden you sit me down and I'm able to read 2 sentences for the first time in my life, I am a different human being.
Yep.
Just on that particular 10 minutes, you just turned me into a very different person, because all of a sudden I can do something I never thought I could do.
Yep. Your self-esteem is altered.
A couple of years ago, there was a young man named Robert who, one of the advisors, one of the counselors came up and said, I have this kid that can't read a word. He's 15 years of age, and he can't read a word. I said, bring him up. So he brought him up, and I sat down with him, and I taught him how to read 2 sentences. And I handed the page to him, and I said, go home, practice these 2 sentences. I want you to be able to read them perfectly tomorrow when you show up. So he came by, he read those 2 sentences perfectly for me. I said, how do you feel now? You should have seen the smile on that kid's face.
Yep.
He was still there 2 years later. And he was a transformed kid. He was dressed, his hair was cut and combed, and he was standing there with this big old smile on his face. All of a sudden, the world opened up.
It's almost like without the reading, they already are in prison.
They're trapped. You're exactly right. They are trapped inside their heads completely.
I totally get that.
And look at the prison populations. They meet that standard of 3rd grade non-readers.
Well, and then when they get in there, a lot of times they actually have the opportunity to learn to read because they do have some classes. It's a very interesting situation. Tell the folks, if they're interested in your reading program, where do they go?
Well, it's a reading process. I don't call it a program because I don't deal with it like a program. It's really a pedagogy. It's an
Okay.
approach, and it's a process that once teachers grab onto it, it becomes a very dynamic thing that they learn to do. So they can go to the website, the www.marquezreading.com, and they can find the information there, and then they can just contact me and begin to work, and we'll sit down, we'll make a proposal, and we'll figure out where best. Here's the other thing. The delivery of it can be highly customized. Mm-hmm. So we can actually sit down and customize it exactly to what it is you're trying to do. And that's it. It's very critical because schools spend a lot of time and effort and money in the programs.
Sure.
And the last thing you want to do is go in and say, don't do this program, do this one.
Yeah.
Because they've invested so much because they believe in it, and you don't want to go in and say, no, don't do your...
We have another program.
Yeah,
for
throw
you.
that one out, do this one. That doesn't make sense in the education business. This one is a value added.
Okay.
it's an add-on, and it's relatively inexpensive, and it has great impact and great effect.
If someone wanted to call you directly and just wanted to forego going to the website, and they just wanted to call you, you want to give them your number where they can contact you?
It's on the website, but it's 214-789-3645. And I like the new generation of old people, older Americans. I love to text. So if you'll send me a text,
That's pretty awesome.
because if I don't recognize that number, I'm not answering it.
Yeah,
And
I'm the
so-
same way. If I get a phone call and I don't recognize the number, which probably there's probably a detriment to that, because not everybody's in your phone that wants to do business
Yeah,
with you.
I know that. That's why I said,
Yeah.
text me.
Yeah.
Use my number at 214-789-3645. Text me. Say, I am so-and-so, and I'd like to talk to you, and
That's
so-and-so.
your reading
I'll call you back,
Yep.
without a problem. But that's the best way
Yep.
to locate me. And then my email address is also on the webpage.
Okay.
So you can.
www.marquezreading.com.
That's it.
Okay.
And so it's relatively simple to find me, and I'll be happy. But here's the other thing I'll tell you. I'll go into any classroom and I'll model for you so you can actually see the process. There's not another consultant in the education business who will go to any teacher's classroom and actually teach the lesson. That, I think, is the
That's a lot of confidence.
Yes, because it's a method, and once you know and understand the method, then you're able to deliver it regardless of the subject, regardless of the class,
Sure.
and so you just alter it depending on the age of the student. It even works for adults, Mike.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, corporations and companies that have a large workforce, if they would invest in making that group of people better readers,
Sure.
their productivity would shoot through the roof, because they'd have more efficient people now being able to read what it is they're supposed to be doing.
Sure.
They'll have more initiative,
Yep.
because they'll want more once they learn how to read.
Sure.
And so, and they'll be happier at work.
Yep.
So even companies could invest and do things.
It's a win-win.
Yes.
Well, Richard, you and I have been friends now for a while.
Yes.
And I appreciate our friendship. I enjoy the time that we spend together. It doesn't amount to a lot of time, but, I say this all the time. God brings people into your life for a reason, and it's up to you to pay attention. And then that opens doors, it opens opportunities. And when we were talking about your program, and our lives have changed a lot in the last year.
Yes.
Because of COVID-19 and just the change in direction of all the different businesses that are impacted by it. It certainly impacted my life, and I know it's impacted yours. And so I wish you very well with the process, Marquez Reading. And so I can tell you this, he's the real deal. And if you're interested in learning more about it, please go to his website and text him, because that's the way to go. On a couple of closing notes on today's show, I am in the process of trying to help a gentleman. He's in his 90s. His business has been in Dallas. Actually, he's owned it for 35, 40 years, and he bought it from his uncle, I believe. And so the business has been in Dallas, Texas for probably 80 or 90 years. And it's called Sneed Plumbing. And Sneed Plumbing is under the gun to close out. And we are liquidating that company right now. And I would highly recommend that you look at our Facebook page in the next 24 hours. We are going to we're doing a bulk offering. We'd like to sell it to one company or one individual. Or a group. I don't care how we do it, but it would be best if we could sell it in bulk, so it'd be a lot easier. It's about 4,000 square feet of plumbing fixtures, every type of brass fitting you've ever seen, every type of valve. So between brass and copper and bronze and you name it. I mean, there's a lot of pipe, things of that nature, copper pipe. And so I've spent the last 4 days of my life dealing with this location over off of Walnut Hill and believe it's Old Denton, I believe that's right. And it's on Congressman. And so if you're interested, send me a text or an email and just watch for the advertisements because we'll be posting it today. And I know the auction will probably start in the next 24 to 48. Now, if you're interested in a bulk offer or you have someone that's in the plumbing business, this would be a great opportunity for someone because it has to be removed before the end of the year. So we're on a timeline here. And like I say, I'm just trying to help out a gentleman that can't help himself. He's up in age, but he needs help getting this accomplished. So it's Sneed Plumbing. It'll be on our website. And it'll, if you're interested, follow it on Facebook as well. And the other thing is, if you know somebody that's interested in a condominium in Addison, Texas, I've made the decision that I'm going to sell my place. So if you have interest, it's in the Adventura building, which is at the corner of Spectrum and Addison Circle. So just a plug for those that might be interested in locating in Addison. It's a great location. I've enjoyed it very much, but it's time for me to do something else, and that's what I'm going to do. And I think that's a full hour, and I want to thank Richard Marquez for being a guest with us today, and of course from Dallas, Texas, and our producer. I appreciate him as well. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. A new topic, a new subject, and a new day. And so for everyone that's been a part of this one here in Dallas, Texas, the Mike McGavel Jones Show, we appreciate you being with us. God bless you. We bid you adieu. Till next time.